Hey there everyone, this is Victor with Victor Vector JKU. Today we are going to be installing the Rear Shock Relocation Bracket by JKS Manufacturing. Let's get into it. Alright, so I initially didn't plan on doing a video on this install because there's some other people out there that have already done these installs and have them up on YouTube, but I didn't see one for the JKS Manufacturing Rear Shock Relocation Bracket. So let's go ahead and show you what we got going on here. So JKS does provide a little instruction manual on how to go about installing this, and they provide you with their parts list, the tools required, what to do to prepare the axle, and they give you some images that show what you need to cut off, grinding locations, where you cut the lower control arm bracket, where the new bracket mounts up to, and how the fasteners get installed. Now, I did notice with the way that they instruct on how to install the fasteners was a little bit difficult for me, so I did something a little bit different. And that's what I'm going to walk through with you guys here today. And I'm going to show you what I did on my driver's side already, and then I'll take you over and I'll show you the process as I go through it on how to do the passenger side. Alright guys, so you can see here that this is the new bracket, all installed, and I already wrapped this one up. So what I'm going to point out, and you're not going to be able to see it on this one because I've already installed everything, but the bolt right here through this access hole here, that guy's actually installed with the threads facing out. And the instructions showed to install it forward or dropping the threads in going into the bracket. I found that was extremely difficult with the clearances trying to get in from underneath with the control arm installed, so I'm going to show you guys how I kind of went about that. But otherwise, this bracket, the way it all installed, looks really good. Now one thing you might notice is that my rear sway bar here is actually the JKS quick disconnect. So I did have factory sway bar links on the rear, and I would have had to cut them down to make them work, and what I did instead was I was like, wait a second, I just installed the Rock Jock anti-rock sway bar up on the front axle, so I did not need the JKS quicker disconnects anymore. So I decided, wait a second, I can use these on the rear, I can set them to the correct height, and I'm going to be golden. So pretty cool little thing here. So what I did was I ended up cutting down the two longer studs, bolted them up, and I installed the cotter pins back on, and then similarly up above I just reused the short ends. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and jump into and show you guys what I'm doing on this passenger side over here to get this guy all set up. Okay, so the first thing before we get into doing any cutting or anything else, what we have to do is we first have to remove our shock, our sway bar link, and the bolt for our lower control arm. Now if you want to, you can go ahead and pull this out, but my bracket, as you can see, is very torn up right now. And on the other side, when I was doing that, I wasn't able to actually drop it out because, or the lower part pinched in. So I couldn't actually slide my lower control arm out. So what I did was I just tucked it up more into the axle, and that was able to give me the clearance I needed to be able to do all the cutting that I needed to do. So once you have that all out of the way, the first thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna end up cutting off the shock bracket and the sway bar link bracket. Alright, so that gets the brackets removed. Now the next thing that I need to do is grind those down smooth. So I'm just going to do that next. Okay, and so all I'm doing to use to cut this stuff is just my 4.5 inch angle grinder. And I used a cutoff wheel, and then now I'm using a flapper disc to go and grind this stuff all smooth. So we got everything ground smooth now. So I am good to go ahead and measure down from this center hole for the instructions, 1 3/8 inches. I'm going to mark a horizontal line. So I've already gone through and done this, but basically what I did was I would hold my tape measure, and I don't like to use the end. I prefer to use one of the marks. So I lined up with 2 inches. I then came down 1 3/8 to 3 3/8 inches, and I made a V mark. After that, I took my straight edge, I aligned it on that V mark, made it approximately horizontal, and then I scored a line across the material. Did that on both sides, And then I was also able to figure out, based on the height from the top of the bracket, that I needed to mark down about 5 3/8 inches from the top here down to here, and that aligns with both sides. So I then again went and did a horizontal line across. And now the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and cut this bracket off. All right, so we just finished cutting off the lower portion of the lower control arm bracket here. I also came through and I hit it with a flapper wheel and ground all the edges smooth so it is nice and cleaned up. Next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna take our bracket here and we're gonna go ahead and do a trial fit, make sure we have all the appropriate clearances we need. So I'm gonna go and slap him up into place. I'm gonna check and make sure my 2 holes in the back are aligned, as well as my control arm bolt, and everything is good. So I have appropriate clearance to be able to get this guy up into place, so we're good to go. I'm gonna wipe this guy down and clean him up, and then I'm gonna go and hit him with a little bit of black paint. So the next thing we're gonna be doing is installing the bracket. So I got the fresh coat of paint on, let it dry, and we're ready to go ahead and install this guy. So the way the instructions called out is to install this, align your lower control arm, and drive your new 9/16 hardware through. But I found that doing this first actually makes it a little bit more difficult, so I'm going to leave this out and I'm going to show you this process to get this done. So what I found out would help work out the best, because trying to get this hole here, and get this bolt through, along with having your washer and nut on the backside when you don't have access from below, you can't really fit a finger up there and get access. Hopefully you can see that there. So I struggled with that for a little while, and then I was like, all right, there's got to be a better way to do this. So what I ended up coming up with is, if you push up your control arm as high as you can then bring this bolt in and feed him from the inside out. Then what I do is lower down the lower control arm. So with this bolt here and the lower control arm where it is, it won't allow that bolt to push all the way back through. So that's going to help me out. Now you do want to push it back a ways, as far as it can go. And then you're going to go ahead and bring your bracket in. You're going to slide him into place. Alright. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull that guy through just a little bit, and I'm going to go ahead and start my washer and nut on this guy. I'm not going to tighten it, I'm just going to get it started. Alright, there we go. Now I'm going to go ahead and feed through my lower control arm bolt. There we go. Alright. Then I can go ahead and install my nut and washer on the other side. And we're not going to tighten this guy in yet, because this guy needs to be torqued when he's on the ground. Alright, so next up what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and install our washer and nut in this upper bolt, or in this upper hole here. So this guy's going to install right here like this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with just putting the washer in place. And then I'll bring the nut in afterwards. Yep, there we go. Much better. And then we're going to go ahead and use our 9/16 open end and socket to go ahead and tighten these guys down. Now you need to use the open end, because if you got the box end in there to put it in place, the bolt itself is too long to be able to get clearance between the axle tube and that to be able to get your box end wrench out. So you have to use the open end. Alright. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go and torque these guys down to 35 foot-pounds, which I already have set on my torque wrench. Alright, there we go. So that wraps up the install of the bracket. Now again, all we have to do is torque down this control arm bolt once we get it on the ground. Next thing that I can do is I can reinstall my shock, and that's going to start with the upper mount. And then what we're going to have to do is I'm going to have to lift up this side, get the jack out from underneath so I can then drop down this to get the bolt holes to line. So I'm gonna do that in a minute. What I'm gonna focus on right now is I'm gonna get my sway bar end links installed. So for these JKS quick disconnect end link pins, what they suggest is to use a dowel pin of some sort and go ahead and drop that in there so when it's tightening you can keep the end from spinning. Now granted, you may not be doing this. Most likely you'll just be reinstalling your factory sway bar. This is just something I'm doing differently because my sway bar won't fit anymore. Alright, so I have those guys installed now. Gonna move that up out of the way. So I'm gonna go ahead and drop the axle down a little bit and get my lower shock back installed. Alright, there we go. I'm installing my lower shock bolt with the threads facing this way because before I've actually damaged both sides and I had to replace these with what were actually the lower sway bar link bolts because I ended up gumming up the threads really bad, so I basically had to cut the old bolts off. So doing it this way, the worst that's going to happen is I'm going to just damage the head of the bolt versus the thread, so I can still get the nut off. It'll just be a case that this guy, the bolt head will be screwed up, but it'll be a lot easier to remove that way. So with that, we are all wrapped up. I just got to tighten everything in. Alright, so the camera ended up dying on me in the process of wrapping up, bolting the rest of the components up on the passenger side. So I got that all done, so let's go ahead and show you guys how it all wrapped up. So you can see I have the driver's side all hooked up, and ends up that my final clearance for the bottom of the bracket to the ground is 11.5 inches, and I started off with 10.25, so I gained 1.25 inches now of ground clearance off of that rear bracket. The shock also got moved up a little bit, so it's in a much safer spot. You don't have to worry about it getting knocked around anymore because it's actually elevated up versus being the lowest point on the bracket. I also, like I mentioned before, reinstalled my JKS quick disconnects, and those guys are in place now for my new sway bar end links for the rear. And then one other thing I want to mention is that there is a need to, and I'll go over to this side here, there is a need to adjust your bump stops because now you're going to have less up travel on your shocks than you did before, since you've now relocated the shock at ride height up about 1.5 inches or so. So what I ended up doing before, because I actually had some rub issues on my inner fenders before I put on my Daystar 1-inch body lift, is I added in this 1-inch spacer below my 3-inch bump stop. So with that there, I think I'm actually good based on where my height is here to where my bump stop is, in correlation with how much compression I have with my shock. So what I'll do before I go out on the trail is I will actually verify, I'll do a flex test and make sure that I'm not bottoming out on my shock. If I am, then I have to increase that bump stop. But yeah, so otherwise, that pretty much wraps up everything here. So hopefully you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, please hit that thumbs up button, give this video a like, and if you're enjoying the content that I'm uploading, then also hit that subscribe button and sign up for notifications so you know when the next time that I'm dropping my video. Otherwise, we are Victor Vector JKU, and we are taking on this build and the trail, both direction and magnitude. Alright guys, have a good one. Catch you next time.